Hey brother! Jay, you wanna know what's never made any sense to me at all is why the Sorting Hat is such a mystery to all new students coming into Hogwarts. Even Hermione, who has read Hogwarts history like 1,000 times, has no idea that it's coming. Are you kidding me? Hogwarts history doesn't explain the sorting ceremony? Well, we think we know why. Today we reveal the Sorting Hat's big secret. Seriously, how is this possible? Harry and all of the other first years are just quietly waiting in the Great Hall before the ceremony, and they're all freaking out about how they're going to be sorted. Harry, understandably, knows nothing, but Ron, whose entire existence in the first book basically seems to be explaining the magical world to Harry, says, some sort of test, I think. Fred says it hurts a lot, but I think he was joking. Weasley family! How does Ron not know about the sorting ceremony? He's the 6th son and 8th member of this family to go to this school. You're all in the same house. How has nobody discussed it like over dinner or something? And Ron isn't the only one. Even Malfoy hints the idea that he doesn't know exactly how the ceremony works when he first meets Harry at Madame Malkin's robe shop. The scene isn't in the movie, but he asks Harry, know which house you'll be in yet? Obviously not, Malfoy, neither do you! Although he does say that he expects he'll be put in Slytherin. But like, Malfoy's father, who tells him everything, who's like one of the governors at Hogwarts, hasn't mentioned this to him, and wizarding families aside, Hermione doesn't even know. Just before the sorting, Hermione starts reciting all of the spells that she's already learned in case she needs to perform them to be sorted. But literally on the walk up to the sorting ceremony, she says,
it's not real, the ceiling. It's just bewitched to look like the night sky. I read about it in Hogwarts. A history.
But you didn't read about the Sorting Hat? I'm sorry, but Hermione is way too thorough for it to be in there and for her to have overlooked it. This is one of the most famous magical artifacts ever. It's literally the starting point for most of these witches and wizards' like lives. It dictates who you will be friends with, what types of things you will most likely go on to value, where you will live, and it's not in Hogwarts history? Or is it? Like I said before, Hermione is way too thorough to have overlooked it. So how could it be in there and for her to have still missed it? What if the knowledge of the Sorting Hat is protected by the Fidelius charm? The Fidelius charm, in case you need a refresher, is the concealment of knowledge inside of another person or secret keeper, and only that secret keeper is capable of transferring that knowledge to others. That information can only be handed over to others voluntarily, and according to Pottermore, cannot be tortured out of you. The charm is a cool idea, but it flirts with a lot of gray areas. Like, the information can't be tortured out of you. Isn't that kind of the point of torturing, is so that somebody does want to voluntarily give you that information? Additionally, once the charm is in effect, only the secret keeper is capable of transferring the information to other people, even if people previously knew the information. For example, other people could have known the location of the Potter's house prior to it being protected by the Fidelius charm, but once it was protected, they would no longer know the location of the house. And if the secret keeper does choose to share that information with somebody else, that person will then be bound by the charm and unable to tell anybody else the information. That is, unless the original secret keeper dies, and now the person who was passed along the information becomes the new secret keeper and is now able to pass along the information themselves. Which means that if the original secret keeper told many people the secret and then died, all of those people would become secret keepers. I told you. It's a very confusing spell. The Fidelius charm was most famously used in the books by the Potters who were trying to hide from Voldemort and decided to use the single worst secret keeper ever in Peter Pettigrew, who promptly gave the information to Voldemort. Seriously! Like, why does Sirius suggest this? Like, the information cannot be tortured out of you, and he even says in the books, believe me, Harry, I never betrayed James and Lily. I would have died before I betrayed them. Or in the movie he says, I would have died! I would have died rather than betray my friend! Yeah, so why suggest the change? Oh yeah, because you say, I thought it was the perfect plan, a bluff. Voldemort would be sure to come after me. Yeah, so what is the bluff? That you are the secret keeper and you want Voldemort and his followers to come after you because you don't actually have the secret? But you'd rather have died than give up the secret anyway, so of course we should just store the original secret in someone else? Serious, I have a secret for you. That is a stupid plan. It's almost like what he's really saying is, I would never betray James and Lily. I think. pretty sure, like 97%. How bad could the Cruciatus curse be? I feel like I could handle it, but just to be safe, we'll store it someplace else. I'm sorry, but I feel like the logic there is a little flawed, but so is the charm altogether a little bit. Like, what are the limitations of this thing? Can you just hide any information inside of someone? Like, for example, how to use a doorknob. Could I just like hide the knowledge and information about how to do that inside of somebody? And then even though lots of people used to know how to open doors, will now all be stuck behind doors. Unless that one person tells everyone. Because based on what I'm reading here, it sounds like that's pretty plausible. Be prepared to be stuck behind doors, everyone. And while we're talking about doors, don't even get me started on Aloha Mora. Why do we even have locks at all if we teach first years a spell that can open pretty much all of them? We operate on the honor system in this entire society. Anyway, back to the original conversation about the Sorting Hat. It would make sense that the information of the Sorting Hat is being protected by the Fidelius charm. Then, even if you grew up in a wizarding family like Ron or Malfoy, their parents would actually be unable to tell them about or to prepare for the sorting ceremony. And that would make sense as to why it wasn't in Hogwarts A History, because you would not actually be able to pass along that information. Or even more possible is that you could write about it, but anyone who wasn't in on the secret wouldn't be able to read those words. I'd mark that as plausible. Once you know about the hat, you could then, of course, discuss it with other people who are also in on the secret. It's kind of like the members of the Order in number 12 Grimwald Place. Once they all know about the location, they're able to freely discuss it amongst themselves, but they can't actually pass along the information to anyone new. It's kind of like a one-way mirror. Everybody let in on the secret can see everything else, but if you haven't been let on the secret yet, you just kind of stare blankly back at yourself. This would effectively mean that all Hogwarts alumni know about the hat and can discuss it with one another, but anybody coming to the school or anyone who has never gone to Hogwarts wouldn't know about it. But does this really need to be kept a secret at all? Actually, yes, I think I can think of at least a few reasons. For one, wizarding schools seem to be pretty secretive about themselves in general. I mean, their actual locations are unknown to most, and even if a muggle does somehow stumble across Hogwarts, all they see is in moldering old ruin. The sorting process itself seems pretty unique to Hogwarts, as Beauxbaton and Durmstrang don't seem to have individual houses. But the sorting process is such a key part of the student's success that I could see from a competitive standpoint why Hogwarts would want to keep it a secret. I also think that keeping the Sorting Hat a mystery adds kind of to its pureness, because you can't actually prepare for it. Sure, Malfoy wants to be in Slytherin and gets his wish, and Harry is allowed to choose not to be in Slytherin, but you could see how knowledge of the ceremony itself could start to damage the integrity of the process. Like, I feel like all of Hufflepuff House would be reserved for those students who managed to somehow get to the ceremony without realizing how it worked. I also like how the first barrier into entering the magical world is kind of this idea of facing the unknown. Like, it's obviously not a very dangerous test, but all of the students are still very nervous beforehand. All of this being said, I'm sure you've already spotted a few issues with this idea. Like, for example, who is the secret keeper for the Sorting Hat? And if they died, would this tradition just be over? Yes, those are both issues. And as I said earlier, if the secret keeper dies, then all of the people that have been told the secret now become secret keepers, and the school's been around for so long that surely the original secret keeper died, right? And of course, the biggest issue of them all is that if the Sorting Hat is protected by the Fidelius charm, then how does Harry tell his son Albus about it during the epilogue?
The Sorting Hat takes your choice into account.
Well, we all know that Professor McGonagall is the one who presents the Sorting Hat at the beginning of the year, so my first thought is that she must be the secret keeper because she's able to pass along that information. But obviously McGonagall hasn't been around since the start of the school, so maybe this is just a new thing and Dumbledore decided that McGonagall should be the secret keeper instead of himself for some reason? But no, because McGonagall hasn't died by the time that Harry tells Albus about the hat, so how could he pass along that information? I admit that was a bit of a problem for this particular theory, but then it hit me. The hat is its own secret keeper. Now this works perfectly. Pottermore says that the Fidelius charm is the concealment of information inside of a living person. Now the hat isn't a living person, but it is sentient and does contain the knowledge of the 4 founders of Hogwarts. The hat has been there since the beginning of the school, so that takes care of that. But what about McGonagall? Well, if you go back and reread the chapter about that first sorting ceremony, you find that McGonagall doesn't actually tell them about the hat. In fact, it specifically says that she silently places the hat on the stool, and then the hat actually tells the students about itself in song form. Yeah, no, I'm not gonna sing. But then there's still the issue of Harry telling Albus, because Albus wouldn't have met the hat yet. True, but I think by the time Albus is attending Hogwarts, the charm has actually been broken by none other than Voldemort. If you remember, in the Deathly Hallows, he summons the hat from Dumbledore's office, places it on Neville's head, and lights it on fire. Voldemort is trying to destroy the hat, trying to destroy the very process of sorting, the very secret we've been discussing this whole time. Whatever Voldemort did, I do think it could classify as the hat itself dying, although by the time of the epilogue, obviously it is back up and running again because Harry's other kids have been sorted by it. But if the hat did in fact die, then everyone who already knew about the hat would become secret keepers, and at that point, Harry could discuss it with someone else. For my question of the day, what do you guys think? Do you think the hat is protected by the Fidelius charm? How come students can't talk about it with students who haven't gone to the school yet? Be sure to leave your thoughts in the towel section down below.
Have you guys ever noticed that Hermione doesn't really hang out with their parents, like, ever? Does she not like them? Are they super controlling? Because I think Harry sees the Dursleys more than she sees her parents.
Bring my coffee, boy.
And he hates them.
Shut up! Shut up!
Hey, brother. Hermione's parents. Boy, Hermione's parents are for sure a bit of an enigma, aren't they? Like, we know they're muggles and they're both dentists, but otherwise, very little. Like, Hermione certainly talks about them, mostly in a, don't worry, they won't mind if I'm not there kind of way, but I think they appear in person on page, like, once.
But you're muggles, said Mr. Weasley delightedly. We must have a drink. What's that you've got there? Oh, you're changing muggle money. Molly, look. He pointed excitedly at the 10-pound notes in Mr. Granger's hand.
That's it. That's the only time we see them in person. They're literally changing money. There's no names, and there's not a single line of dialogue between them. And then, as usual, Hermione's all like, great seeing you, Mom and Dad. Have fun talking about money or whatever with Mr. Weasley. I've got a whole Dark Wizard subplot to go jump into. See ya next summer or maybe later. Okay, fine. Sure, they show up a little bit later in that same chapter for Lucius Malfoy to sneer at and to look aghast when Arthur and him start fighting. But that's pretty much it. That's all we see of them. And the thing is, Hermione barely spends any more time with them herself than we, the audience, do, especially as we get into the later books. The question is why? Like, I've always assumed they were pretty standard parents, but could there be more to the story? Could they be the reason that Hermione's Boggart is failing a single test? Are they to blame for why Hermione has trouble casting a Patronus because she has so few happy memories to draw on from home? Oh, well, today we find out.
Hey, brother!
Okay, let's break it down. How much time does Hermione actually spend or not spend with her parents over the years? Well, during her first year at Hogwarts, things go about as you'd expect. Hermione, who hasn't seen them since September, is alone in a new school, a new culture, and returns home for Christmas, leaving Harry and Ron behind to research Nicholas Flamel.
Not in the restricted section.
Hooray!
How could I be so stupid?
Then the summer after the first year, she also returns home, so far so good. But then in Chamber of Secrets, we know Hermione does not go home for Christmas that year because she and Harry and Ron stay to ask Malfoy about the Chamber of Secrets using the Polyjuice potion they've been brewing all year. Which means she actually spends the rest of Christmas break in the hospital wing as like a half cat, half person, and they don't really learn much from Draco, so I'm betting she wishes she did just go home, and she seems to take heed of that advice because the following summer, she does go to France with her parents. Yay! That sounds like a fun trip, Try some bouillabaisse. Yum. But maybe it wasn't that fun because the following Christmas break, she once again stays at school and then lies about it. Both Ron and Hermione had decided to remain at Hogwarts, and though Ron said it was because he couldn't stand 2 weeks with Percy, and Hermione insisted she needed to use the library, Harry wasn't fooled. They were doing it to keep him company, and he was very grateful. But why lie? Sorry, Mom, one of my best friends is the target of an extremely dangerous escaped convict, and if I don't stay, he'll be all alone at Christmas. Like, that seems like a reasonable and noble and, like, in the holiday spirit, I think they would have understood. No, these people only understand libraries.
Right!
Of course, then what actually happens is that's when Harry gets the firebolt, and then Hermione snitches on him, and then Ron and Harry don't talk to her for a while, so yeah, another great Christmas for Hermione in the books at Hogwarts. Woo! But then that summer is when the Quidditch World Cup is, which is on August 18th, and Hermione arrives presumably on the 17th, the same day as Harry, and stays at the Burrow for the rest of the summer, so that's 14 days or 2 weeks of her 8-week holiday away from the parents. And that is going to be the last time they see her for any significant length of time for, who knows how long. Because that winter is the Yule Ball, where she obviously stays and goes with Victor Crumb and, fights with Ron for the second year in a row.
That's just completely off the point.
Then the next summer, she's at the headquarters of the Order of the Phoenix for what feels like the whole summer. Like, I don't know, maybe she went home for a minute, but certainly spends a majority of her time at the Weasleys, but not even actually at their house.
So what is this place?
Can you imagine Molly and Arthur explaining that to the Order? Like, no, our kids have to live there because we have to live with the kids. That's okay. And they're like, you know what? That's fine. And they're like, and could Ron invite a friend? How many kids do we need here? Harry Potter is her friend too. We're good. She can come. But then that winter, Hermione lies to her parents again about needing to study because of OWLs, when actually she just doesn't want to go skiing. They're going skiing and they invited her and she's like, nah, because you know how cheap skiing is, right? No, it's fine. It's fine. But she doesn't even study. She just goes back to Grimmauld Place. Then finally, a full year later, they see her for 12 days before she goes back to the Weasleys for the rest of the summer again. And then finally in year 6, she actually makes it home for Christmas and has this to say about it. So, how was your Christmas? Oh, fine. She shrugged. Nothing special. Yeah. First Christmas home in 5 years, but meh, nothing special. Boring even. I mean, certainly not worth more than 4 words of discussion. Mom and Dad. But don't worry, because she does go back next summer for like a day to erase her parents' memories of her existence, which now that we break it down, probably didn't take that much time, How much was there to erase? And then, of course, she spends Christmas that year at Godric's Hollow with Harry, getting attacked by Nagini, and no Ron because her and Ron were fighting again. I mean, at this point, what is Christmas without the annual Ron and Hermione Cold War, right? Right. 'Tis the season.
You complete Ronald Weasley.
But is it not crazy that we know Hermione's parents' fake names, Monica and Wendell Wilkins, but not their real names? Although, I will venture a guess that their names are Hugo and Rose Granger, based solely on Hermione and Ron's kids' names, which are otherwise just sort of totally out of left field. And that's sort of the Harry Potter naming convention, isn't it? Just like, what were my parents' names? Those are my kids' names. This is my son, James Sirius, and this is Lily Luna. Luna's still alive. I don't know how I got that one past Ginny. And this is Albus Severus, not like Albus George or something. That guy who's mean to all of my friends and me for... But I literally did the math on this. And if I generously decide to give Hermione a full week at home after year 4 before going to the headquarters, and 1 day after year 6 to erase her parents' memories, it adds up to 202 out of 434 available days of vacation spent at home, which is 46%, or less than half. But most of that is just those summers in the first 3 years. After year 4, it drops off a cliff to a resounding 16% of available vacation time spent at home. Bear in mind, that's just the vacation time. 202 days is all they're going to see her at all for the whole next 7 years, which is 12%. So what is going on here? Why does Hermione keep ditching her parents? Well, we got a letter over on Through the Gryffindor from Josh G, suggesting it's because Hermione actually has a very stressful home life, and Josh cited several aspects of her personality as proof. First, we got the fact that her boggart takes the form of McGonagall telling Hermione she has failed the test, pointing to a kind of parenting where love feels conditional on success. Conditional love, it's the worst. Don't do that. But you can also kind of see that in play early on when Hermione famously states,
If you two don't mind, I'm going to bed before either of you come up with another clever idea to get us killed. or worse, expelled.
Then there's also the fact that Hermione is so passionate about house elf rights, suggesting maybe her sympathy comes from understanding what it feels like to always have to do what you're told, no matter what.
Come, Dobby. We're leaving.
And finally is the fact that Hermione, of all people, has trouble casting a Patronus. Like, sure, she can do it in the DA room when not under pressure, but at the Ministry, expecto Patronum, said Hermione. Nothing happened. It's the only spell she ever has trouble with, Harry told a completely bemused Mrs. Cattermole. But unfortunate, really. And of course, the proof there is that the key to casting a Patronus is summoning a powerful happy memory, and yet Hermione seems to struggle with producing them. Could it be because a time with her parents isn't very happy, and then all her time at Hogwarts is either so dangerous or so tainted with the pressure from home that she has difficulty casting around for an appropriate memory? Well, let's take each of those one at a time. First, the Boggart. Does her fear of failing her classes represent a kind of crazy pressure from her parents back home? Well, I doubt it. I mean, I'm sure they want her to succeed, but I'm also sure they'd love her either way. I mean, the reason I think Hermione fears failure so much is also part of what makes her such a Gryffindor and not a Ravenclaw, and that is Hermione's a very proud person. She enjoys learning, obviously, but also actively enjoys being the one who knows the most and being the best at school. She knows there are other things that are perhaps more important, but this is what she has chosen to be important to her.
Books and cleverness. There are more important things.
And you really see this on display in Slughorn's class, where Hermione is horribly offended by the prince. Not because of his attitude, but very clearly because she cannot stand not being the best at potions. And then you can see it again when you get the OWL results, and Hermione is upset she missed out on straight O's by getting an E in Defense Against the Dark Arts because she takes such tremendous pride in her schoolwork. But if you ask me, I think her quest for perfection likely comes more from her Muggle-born status, which unwittingly makes her a representative for a group of people commonly shown prejudice in the wizarding world.
No one asked your opinion, you filthy little mudblood.
You foul and loathsome evil little cockroach!
Therefore, Hermione may strive for excellence out of a need to overcompensate for her perceived shortcomings and simultaneously silence all of her critics. And this actually works as a pretty good answer for why she's so deeply concerned about house elves, because I have a feeling if her parents were controlling her in the same way wizards control house elves, we would have heard about it. I mean, Harry is very open about how the Dursleys treat him, and there'd be no reason not to bring it up, especially when she tries every other way she can think to get people interested in SPEW. But on the other hand, Hermione does know what it feels like to be an outsider in the wizarding world. She didn't grow up there. Her parents know nothing of the world. And yet, despite her own insane power and intelligence, much like the house elves, she is looked down upon by members of her own community. So of course, out of all the other students, she is the one to stand up for the house elves and channel her sense of injustice into helping a different marginalized group. And that just brings us to the Patronus. Why isn't Hermione better at casting hers? Besides the obvious answer, which is just because, like the plot feels better if Harry's the best one, right?
But I am the chosen one.
Expecto Patronum!
Because certainly she has a life full of happy memories, right? And yes, I would agree with that. For sure she does. But I think the reason Hermione has trouble with casting a Patronus is the same reason she's not good at flying. Because Patronuses are a kind of instinctual magic, like summoning the broom to your hand, or Harry's natural ability upon the broom. It's like when Harry knows Ron has to be the one to destroy the locket. He was not being kind or generous. As certain as he known the dough was benign, he knew that Ron had to be the one to wield the sword. Dumbledore had at least taught Harry something about certain kinds of magic, of the incalculable power of certain acts. Yes, Lupin tells Harry he needs to focus on a happy memory, and while I think that does help, grease the wheels and he's able to cast some of that silver mist, the two times we actually see Harry cast the stag in Prisoner of Azkaban, that's not how he does it. The first time happens in the Quidditch match when he sees the fake Dementor and acts on instinct, blasting Draco and his buddies. He didn't stop to think. Plunging a hand on the neck of his robes, he whipped out his wand and roared, "Expecto Patronum!" Catch that? Didn't stop to think. Same thing is true at the lake. Harry doesn't walk forward with a happy thought. He just realizes the truth of the situation. He did it before, so he can do it now. Instinct tells him what to do. Therefore, when it comes to casting a Patronus, it's much more about feeling rather than focusing. More about bravery and friendship than books and cleverness. I'm sure Hermione can concentrate on a happy memory, but can she feel that memory? I mean, obviously, yes, she does, because she casts the otter, and she does do it in the Ministry too. But it's harder, and that I think is her issue with the Patronus. So, does Hermione love her parents? Yes, I think they had a totally fine, healthy, supportive relationship. They basically said, "Do whatever you want. We can tell that you're insanely smart, and we trust you. You'll probably be Minister for Magic one day." And she was. Honestly, I think the real reason we never hear from them is that they were just too boring to be part of the story. Is death a Dementor? Hey, brother! In Deathly Hallows, we are briefly introduced to the character of Death when Xenophilius is telling the Golden Trio the tale of the three brothers. It is said that the three brothers of the tale met Death on a lonely road and outsmarted him and were therefore each gifted an object by Death at their request. And as we all know, this resulted in the creation of the three Deathly Hallows. The first brother, Antioch, requested a wand that could defeat any other wand and was gifted the Elder Wand. The second brother, Cadmus, wanted to recall the dead and was gifted the Resurrection Stone. And the third brother, Harry's own ancestor Ignotus, wanted to hide from death and was gifted Death's own Cloak of Invisibility, under which he hid and evaded death for the rest of his entire life before finally greeting him like an old friend. When Dumbledore meets Harry in King's Cross, however, he suggests that the brothers didn't actually meet death. Whether they met death on a lonely road, I think it's more likely that the Peverell brothers were simply gifted, dangerous wizards who succeeded in creating those powerful objects. The story of them being Death's own Hallows seems to me the sort of legend that might have sprung up around such creations. And since the initial story is coming from a book of fairy tales and Dumbledore is usually right in his guesses, it's easy to conclude that death in the fairy tale is not an actual being, but more like a concept brought to life for the sake of creating a more entertaining story. And yet, even Dumbledore is hedging a little bit, saying it's just more likely, leaving the door open to the possibility that death is a real being within the wizarding world. But then you have to wonder, like, okay, if death is real, then is he like the actual embodiment of the concept of death, just like a quiet, ethereal figure that exists in the spaces between life, a timeless entity that observes without judgment, cloaked in the soft darkness of the unknown? Or is he just a wholly unique and wildly dangerous and cunning fantastic beast? Today, we figure out exactly who and or what death really is. Hey, brother! Okay, guys, so this entire video idea came to us while we were out on tour with our podcast through the Gryffindor, and we were on the chapter, The Dementor's Kiss, which, side note, is actually the shortest chapter in all of Harry Potter. But as per always on the show, we were discussing the chapter art, which looks like this. Harry, wearing a cape, obviously, trying in vain to defend off a huge group of Dementors from, I don't know, Sirius? Hermione? Seriously, who is this supposed to be? Like, the whole chapter is about Sirius getting attacked, and like, they are wearing a striped shirt, which is just giving prison core, but like Hermione also collapses, and this just looks more like her. So I don't know, who do you think this is in the chapter art? Either way, the more critical thing is the Dementors in this picture and just how very much they look like what you commonly think of as death or like the Grim Reaper. just huge, faceless figure in a dark hood that is there to collect your soul. And that sparked the idea in our minds that, is it possible that death, at least in the wizarding world, is just a Dementor? And like right off the bat, I'm sure you can just like wave aside that idea. I mean, like for one, death kills people, whereas, Dementors just suck out their souls, which is arguably a fate worse than death, leaving people with just, a husk of a body and no personality at all to speak of. Plus, death is mainly thought of as like a singular entity, while obviously there are hundreds, if not thousands, of Dementors out there. That's all true. And yet, is death not also collecting souls? A Dementor seems to only have the power to take your soul, but then leave your life force and body behind, while death can claim both soul and life. Bodies, it would seem, are just very useless to the entire afterlife. I don't know, maybe they just take a couple out of space or something. Space! But what I'm getting at is that it seems like in appearance and power, death is something of a super Dementor. Consider this. Death seems to be very cunning, while Dementors are of a fairly one-track mind, just feed on happiness, maybe suck out a soul or two. So what could account for that difference? What could give a Dementor a personality? Indeed, is not the very thing they're sucking out of everyone they attack with the Dementor's kiss their personality? Could death be just the earliest and or most effective Dementor of all time? One who has consumed so many souls he transcended into a new form of being? Which, if you're a longtime viewer of the channel, might sound familiar, because you may recall that we also have a theory that Dementors themselves are just fully grown up and developed boggarts. I mean, one turns into your worst fear, and the other makes you relive your worst memory. Plus, Harry's boggart Dementor is actually able to replicate many of the actual Dementor's characteristics. Do you think the acromantula it turned into for Ron was truly venomous, or did it just look like an acromantula? Personally, I'm inclined to think the latter, and yet its Dementor form still makes Harry relive his parents' deaths. And here's the cherry on top. What is the key issue in Harry's trial after he and Dudley are attacked by the Dementors? It's the fact that Dudley couldn't see them to confirm anything was really there, because Dementors are invisible to Muggles.
Muggles can't see Dementors, can they, boy?
So, do you suppose that the upgraded version of that would be also being invisible to wizards? And does Death himself not possess a one-of-a-kind invisibility cloak? Well, I mean, not anymore, but we'll get to that. Yeah, Death is a super Dementor. Boom. Mic drop. But actually not the end of the video. I'm going to pick this up because that got me thinking about a whole different theory. Now I broke it. Okay, it's back. I fixed it. You can't see it, but Ben put a thumbs up. I'll imitate. Damn it, my thumbs up to myself giving that. Point is, are you ready for a theory inside a theory? We've always been told that Patronuses are the only thing that drive Dementors back. According to Lupin, a Patronus, which is a kind of anti-Dementor, a guardian which acts as a shield between you and the Dementor. The Patronus is a kind of positive force, a projection of the very things that a Dementor feeds upon. Hope, happiness, the desire to survive, but it cannot feel despair as real humans can, so the Dementors can't hurt it. Patronuses are bright, white, glowing forces of purity and happiness, which actually sounds a lot like a different fantastic beast as well. A unicorn. A being that is of such pureness that to slay one is almost considered an act against nature by the centaurs. The blood of a unicorn will keep you alive even if you're an inch from death, but at a terrible price. You have slain something pure and defenseless to save yourself, and you'll have but a half-life. A cursed life from the moment the blood touches your lips. That not me realizing that was the first time I've done a Centaurian accent on the channel, I think. hope you enjoyed that. Mars is bright tonight. Yeah, we've heard. Okay, so a unicorn looks and acts like a living, breathing Patronus, the only thing that can stop a Dementor, and its blood can stop, what was it? Death. So, if we connect some dots, if death is a Dementor and a unicorn can stop death, then it stands to reason to me that a unicorn could also fight off a Dementor, right? The obvious problem being that like wizards rarely just have, access to unicorn at a moment's notice. Whereas if they can cast a Patronus, they're never without safety. So it's probably better just learn the spell. But I would love to know what you guys think. Could a unicorn successfully fend off a Dementor? Like, had there been unicorns running around the lake that night, could Harry have also been saved by like just a rogue unicorn striding through the woods? Because to be fair, he even mistakes his own Patronus for a unicorn the first time he sees it. Harry tried to make out what it was. It was as bright as a unicorn. Fighting to stay conscious, Harry watched it canter to a halt as it reached the opposite shore. But okay, so speaking of death and Harry and his near miss with the Dementors in that specific moment, I would also like to bring your attention specifically to the Dementor that almost kisses Harry in this scene, because its behavior seems unusual. Like, even Fudge is surprised by it. Oh yes, they'll have to go, said Fudge, running his fingers distractedly through his hair. Never dreamed they'd attempt to administer the kiss on an innocent boy. Completely out of control. No, I'll have them packed off back to Azkaban tonight. Getting to do a lot of fun voices in this video. But this is a fair question for a bunch of reasons, not the least of which has to do with the fact that the Dementors at Azkaban have constant, unimpeded access to their prisoners and don't just go around administering kisses left and right. Like, why on this night? Why Harry? And it's not just the Dementor in question's decision to deliver the kiss. It does some kind of other unusual things as well. A dead, slimy hand slid out from under the cloak. It made a gesture as though to sweep the Patronus aside. Say what now? Now, in that moment, Harry is only able to produce like his mist Patronus form, the uncorporeal Patronus, like not full on prongs, but usually there's nothing the Dementors can do about that. It's not like long-term effective, but it can hold back like at least one Dementor. Like Lupin said earlier, Dementors can't hurt a Patronus, but this Dementor seems at least to be able to like, give it a little shove. But it's not just that. Harry also has enough focus to notice this. The nearest Dementor seemed to be considering him. Why? Why is this Dementor considering Harry? Is he just like, hey, extra snack? Because none of the other Dementors do this, but don't worry. I do have a few explanations. First possibility is that this Dementor notices that Harry has not one, but two souls and simply just cannot resist the opportunity to feed on the buffet. Or second, it is possible that this Dementor realizes that the soul inside of Harry is specifically Voldemort's soul, and since Voldemort is in fact not innocent, this Dementor takes heroic action and tries to defeat the Dark Lord, in which case, like, wow, nice initiative, Dementor. Probably should have considered the fact that it was, a small boy, but I suppose you are sightless, so still not very forgivable. Or third, this particular Patronus-waving Dementor is actually Big D himself.
Hey, Big D.
Whoops, sorry, no, not that Big D. Big D as in capital D Death himself. And what he recognizes when he sees Harry isn't Harry, but the ancestor of Ignotus Peverell, the brother that eluded him. The last living descendant of the mortal soul who took his death's cloak of invisibility and has been using it to hide his family from him ever since. Only when he had attained a great age that the youngest brother finally took off the cloak of invisibility and gave it to his son. And then he greeted death as an old friend and went with him gladly, as equals, they departed this life. So like in my mind, as this Dementor is like shifting the Patronus aside and like looks up, he's breathing out, he's like, oh, Ignotus, you son of a gun, you owe me. Because Ignotus may have greeted death like an old friend, but The cloak is still out there, hiding the next generation, century after century, and here stands the last living descendant from that very line. And Death thinks to himself that the joke is finally over. He will truly have the last laugh. But then Harry ruins it for him anyway by having a second version of himself on the opposite lakeshore. And then he later also comes back from the dead. So, ha, man. Death is just getting owned by this particular bloodline. Fourth possibility, I suppose, is that Dementors are just evil and they didn't care that Harry was innocent or anything. But it's not like they try and attack Hermione.
Hey, brother! The Thestral problem. It has plagued the Harry Potter fandom for years. And if you don't know what we're talking about, it has to do with why and when and how Harry can begin to see the Thestrals. I can see them too. You're just as sane as I am. Thestrals, as a reminder, are the winged black horses that live in the Forbidden Forest and pull the carriages up to the school and which remain invisible until you have witnessed death. And some people might say that Harry should have been able to see them the entire time because he was present for the death of his mother as a baby and even has vague memories of the event. Then some others might say that those were too vague and without context, but after the Dementor showed up in Prisoner of Azkaban, he should be able to see them then because the memories were clearer and stronger. Then don't even get me started on like Quirrell's death in Philosopher's Stone. Like, he was certainly there for that death, wasn't he? But the real issue, and the one that has definitely caused the most amount of speculation, comes at the end of Goblet of Fire and the beginning of Order of the Phoenix. Because upon arriving to school in Harry's 5th year, he can at long last see the Thestrals and is confused by the mystery of them for a good portion of the year. There's nothing there, Harry. They're pulling themselves like always. Oh, Hermione. You're wrong. They're not pulling themselves, right? Right. They're Thestrals, right? Yeah. Am I remembering it correctly? I'm messing with you. Which, like, there's no problem, right? Like, he saw Cedric die at the end of Goblet of Fire. And yes, now we have a very obvious case of Harry definitely seeing someone die. So the Thestrals should be visible. The issue, though, is this passage here at the end of Goblet of Fire, which also takes place after Cedric's death. Hermione turned away, smiling at the horseless carriages that were now trundling toward them up the drive, as Crumb, looking surprised but gratified, signed a fragment of parchment for Ron. Why can't you see the horses yet, Harry? Like, what's the deal? Well, at long last, I think we've finally discovered the true root of the problem and exactly why and how this discrepancy truly exists. Hey, brother! Okay, so let's tackle the elephants in the room first things pronto, because I know we're not the first to tackle this question. Heck, I'm not even sure that this is even the first time we've tackled this particular question on this channel. We've all got some variation of an answer inside of our heads.
Of course it's happening inside your head, Harry.
Explanation number one, in my mind, the most truthful actual answer to this question is that Thestrals just didn't exist yet at the end of Goblet. Plain and simple. Horseless carriages just seemed like a funny and whimsical piece of magic that's kind of eerie and also kind of not. Like, the boats that take the first years across the Black Lake also seem to travel of their own accord, or possibly thanks to giant squid locomotion. Full video by clicking the card. But either they weren't invented by the author upon completion of Goblet, so they were not included, or they were, and it was just a total mistake, slip of the mind. It's like a whoopsies! And boom, bam, there you go, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. No, I'm just kidding. That's obviously not it, because as is sometimes the case in a fantasy world, the explanation of things aren't found within the pages of the story, but externally on, like, Twitter or X or whatever it's called these days. And honestly, I don't always hate this. Sometimes it's just not plot-centric as to how something happens, so it goes unexplained, and we need the highest authority to add some weight to the debate. Such is true in this instance, where we could pull the following from, in this case, the Pottermore archives. After the death of Cedric Diggory, weeks elapsed before the full import of Death's finality was borne upon him. Only at this point did the Thestrals that pulled the carriages from Hogsmeade Station to Hogwarts Castle become visible to him.
What is it?
And I mean, this makes the rules a little wishy-washy and maybe a tad vague, but also let's not pretend like it's not an incredibly traumatic event that happened to Harry. And so if that works for you, then that works for me too. Carry on. However, Jay and I here at SCB have a saying. There's no such thing as plot holes, simply opportunities for theories. And this case in particular presents a spectacular opportunity to make everything fit, using exactly what we already have. There's no need to actually step outside of the canon. It's all there. It just took us like 20 years to finally see it. Or maybe in this case, I should say, fully process what actually happened. You see it there? It's like process, like Thestrals, invisible. It's a meta. You get it. That being said, I know this is a big question tons of people had, so let's take it step by step and make sure we cover all of our bases.
Nothing's pulling the carriage, Harry.
First of all, why can't Harry see the Thestrals upon the death of his mother? Well, I think this one's pretty basic. He actually didn't see it. All of his memories of that particular instance are just the blinding green light and the sounds of the room, and even that light is the spell hitting himself, not Lily. Sometimes when he strained his memory during long hours in his cupboard, he came up with a strange vision, a blinding flash of green light and a burning pain on his forehead. This he supposed was the crash, though he couldn't imagine where all the green light came from. He couldn't remember his parents at all. So that's Harry trying as hard as he can to remember, and he can't. It's just the curse hitting him. It even says that he couldn't remember his parents at all. But then there are the Dementors. When Harry meets them in year 3, he starts getting much more intense memories from this particular scene. Here's what we know he hears. On the train, it's just Lily screaming. Then during the Quidditch match, "Not Harry! Not Harry! Please! Not Harry! Stand aside, silly girl! Stand aside now! Not Harry! Please! No! Take me! Kill me instead!" And then training with Lupin, "Lily, take Harry and go! It's him! Go, run! I'll hold him off!" The sounds of somebody stumbling from a room, a door bursting open, a cackle of high-pitched laughter. In all cases, I think it's worth noting that he's just hearing things, not seeing anything. His thoughts are shrouded in a white fog. Plus, we know he doesn't even hear Voldemort cast the Avada Kedavra spell because he won't learn it until the following year. So, horrible, yes, of course, but did Harry actually witness anything from the Dementors? No, he just heard the nightmares. But maybe they shouldn't have even mattered, because long before the Dementors even show up, Harry spent time down in the Chamber of Secret Obstacles with Quirrell, who also died in front of him. Or did he? This one I think the film muddies the waters the most, because it sure seems like Harry just murders Quirrell, but it's quite different in the book. The pain in Harry's head was building. He couldn't see. He could only hear Quirrell's terrible shrieks and Voldemort's yell of, "Kill him! Kill him!" And other voices, maybe in Harry's own head, crying, "Harry! Harry!" He felt Quirrell's arm wrenched from his grasp, knew all was lost, and fell into blackness. Down, down, down. Do you see? He couldn't see, and also totally blacks out before Quirrell actually dies, either way. So, had he been awake, he couldn't see anything, but he wasn't, so there you go. Didn't witness death. And also, just to be super clear about it, Harry is not the one who killed him either, despite what they show in the movie. It is Voldemort leaving Quirrell that ultimately kills him. But then we get to Cedric, the most complicated situation of the lot. Because here's the thing. Whether you think it was a matter of processing Cedric's death or not, whether you think the Thestrals were invented or not, it doesn't matter. Harry does not see Cedric die. The book even doubles down on this. First, his wand slipped from his fingers as he put his hands over his face. His knees buckled, he was on the ground, and he could see nothing at all. His head was about to split open. It really is amazing how often Harry can see nothing at all, isn't it? Either way, then we get this. From far away, above his head, he could hear a high, cold voice say, "Kill the spare!" A swishing noise, and a second voice which screeched the words into the night. "Avada Kedavra!" A blast of green light blazed through Harry's eyelids as he heard something heavy fall to the ground beside him. Are we splitting hairs on what it means to witness death? Yes, we absolutely are. However, it does seem to make a difference here. Because really the problem isn't that he can't see the Thestrals at the end of Goblet, it's that he can see them at the beginning of Order of the Phoenix. So what happens over the summer that makes a difference? Or maybe even more specifically, what happens this very night in the graveyard? Well, as the wise Elsa from Frozen once said...
Well, actually, a bridge has two sides.
No one expected that clip from a children's animated movie in a video about death, did they?
Their parents are dead.
Is Frozen a kid's movie? Does Elsa die at the end of Frozen 2? I think she does, but that's not today's video. But the bridge thing, that really is the point that we need to try and make. Because up until Voldemort's resurrection, we know that Harry has brief glimpses into Voldemort's mind, or at least glimpses of his surroundings.
Well, there's a reason Harry can speak with snakes.
This is side number 1 of the bridge. Harry has Voldemort inside his person and gains unusual access to Voldemort at unique times. This happens most significantly at the beginning of Goblet of Fire, when Harry witnesses the death of Frank Bryce in a dream, and again later in his 4th year, when Harry again dreams about an eagle owl flying to deliver the news of Barty Sr.'s death. Which is actually the goofiest chapter art that we get in the whole saga. Harry's actually riding the owl, and it's just pure silliness. Both of these scenes are really significant though. Not only for the insight that Harry gains on what Voldemort is up to, but the perspective of those visions.
A little perspective.
Take the following passage. Slowly, with his face screwed up, as though he would rather have done anything than approach his master in the hearth rug where the snake lay, the small man walked forward and began to turn the chair. And then the chair was facing Frank, and he saw what was sitting in it. Harry isn't seeing the scene from Voldemort's perspective. He's not in the chair turning to see Frank standing in the doorway. He's viewing the scene almost as a third-person point of view, looking on as it unfolds. But then something really important happens in Goblet of Fire. Voldemort takes Harry's blood, and this is side number 2 of the bridge. And from that point on, anytime Harry gets a vision, it is no longer a third-person perspective, it is a first-person perspective. Like, for example, when Nagini attacks Mr. Weasley. Harry is terrified that it was him who did it because he saw the whole thing from the point of view of the snake. Were you perhaps standing beside the victim, or else looking down on the scene from above? This was such a curious question that Harry gaped at Dumbledore. It was almost as though he knew. I was the snake, he said. I saw it all from the snake's point of view. Then, when Voldemort is hunting the Elder Wand, he sees the events from Voldemort's point of view again. Give it to me, Gregorovitch! Harry's voice was high, clear, and cold, his wand held in front of him by a long-fingered white hand. As Harry spoke, his scar burned worse than ever, and for a few seconds he looked down, not upon the wandmaker, but on another man, who was just as old, just as thin, but laughing scornfully. Do you see what I mean? This shift is really subtle, because we've always known that Harry can enter Voldemort's mind, but how it works has changed. And now some of you may rightly point out that when Harry sees Voldemort torturing Sirius in the Department of Mysteries, it's third person again. But that didn't really happen, did it? That's a memory specifically planted by Voldemort. It's the kind of thing that Dumbledore likely would have seen through immediately and known that it was a hoax, given that he asks about the perspective during Arthur's attack. But because of someone, he happens to not be present for that. It's Umbridge. She's the someone. And I hate her.
I will have order.
But with all that in mind, then let's also revisit yet another vision we know Harry has after Goblet, but before order really takes off properly. I heard you last night, said Dudley breathlessly, talking in your sleep, moaning. What do you mean? Harry said again, but there was a cold plunging sensation in his stomach. He had revisited the graveyard last night in his dreams. Dudley gave a harsh bark of laughter and then adopted a high-pitched whimpering voice. Don't kill Cedric! Don't kill Cedric! Who's Cedric? Your boyfriend? First of all, Harry wishes. You see the jawline on that guy? I mean, wow. But also, we're only 1 month out since the events of the graveyard. The bridge with 2 sides, so to speak, is fairly brand new for both Harry and Voldemort at this point. So it's not surprising that Harry may revisit this moment in his dreams, given the dramatic nature, but it's also not absurd to think that Voldemort himself may also be revisiting that same scene. It is, after all, a really big plan that kind of went wrong for him, but also kind of right. He did come back to life, so. Point is, if it's Voldemort's vision that Harry's seeing and not his own, then finally Harry actually is witnessing Cedric's death with eyes wide open. In fact, there's also this passage. Because even when he escaped nightmares about Cedric, he had unsettling dreams about long, dark corridors, all finishing in dead ends and locked doors, which he supposed he had something to do with the trapped feeling he had when he was awake. And to me, this all but confirms that Harry's viewing into Voldemort's mind, because the corridor in question is at the Department of Mysteries, and the reason why Voldemort is dwelling on it is because it's where the prophecy that he's going to spend the next 830 some odd pages trying to gain access to. And it doesn't work. Long story short, Harry didn't personally see Cedric die in the graveyard, but afterwards, he began seeing through Voldemort's point of view in his visions and did see it from that vantage point in his dreams, which is why he can see the Thestrals in order, but not at the end of Goblet.
Hey, brother! Guys, you all know Hagrid, right? 10 foot tall, 3 feet wide, hands the size of dustbins. Keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Lives in a hut, loves dangerous monsters, casual millionaire. Oh, wait, did that last one surprise you? Yeah, today we're gonna discuss how and if Hagrid is actually loaded. Hagrid lives possibly the most simple life of any of the adults we meet in the Harry Potter series. To the point where, I'm not sure he's not 100% responsible for the whole, tiny house movement happening right now. But if you ask me, it is kind of crazy for Hagrid, who is a literal half giant and lives in a tiny 1-room house with a dog. Me personally, I'm half Hagrid's size, and I don't even like, being confined into a standing shower. And I don't even have a dog in there. His tiny lot of possessions would seem to include a single half-giant sized moleskin overcoat, which Harry describes as mostly pockets, another uglier coat, an even uglier tie, boots, some chipped dishware, some tankards, a quilt, definitely not an umbrella, a crossbow, and a barrel. I mean, everyone needs a good barrel, am I right? I mean, I know I've got one at home. She's pretty great. Her name's Chelsea. It has always been comical to me that the largest person Harry knows also lives in like the smallest house, and also ironically on the edge of the grounds next to a giant freaking castle. Why such a small house? My assumption has always been that Hagrid must just earn a very meager salary and that this is simply all he can afford. But the more I think about it, the less that actually seems to make sense. For one, I'm not sure Hagrid himself has to do any of the affording of the house. I mean, since he works for the school and lives on the school's grounds, it seems more likely this is just the accommodations provided by Hogwarts to whoever the gamekeeper happens to be. Which I guess could explain why Hagrid never upgrades. I mean, if you think about it, he's been living on the grounds since he was expelled in his 3rd year. So if he started living in the cabin then, he probably wasn't totally fully grown, so maybe it seemed like more than enough space for just a regular sized man. Or, you know, a 13-year-old prepubescent half giant. That being said though, would he have lived there alone right out of the gate? Figuring out when Hagrid becomes the official gamekeeper is actually kind of tricky. Like I said, he was expelled in his 3rd year, and according to Tom Riddle's memory, only the Transfiguration teacher Dumbledore seemed to think Hagrid was innocent. He persuaded Dippet to keep Hagrid and train him as gamekeeper. And Rita Skeeter writes in her article, Rubius Hagrid, who admits to being expelled from Hogwarts in his 3rd year, has enjoyed the position of gamekeeper at the school ever since, a job secured for him by Dumbledore. Now I agree those aren't necessarily the most reliable resources, but it is still in keeping with exactly what Hagrid tells Harry almost as soon as he meets him, that Dumbledore let him stay on as gamekeeper. But then Mrs. Weasley says later on that the gamekeeper when she was at Hogwarts was a man named Og, which might not be an issue, except that Mrs. Weasley would have attended Hogwarts after Hagrid was expelled, so then were they just both gamekeeper for a while? Were they both living in the hut? Was Og teaching Hagrid what to do? Did Mrs. Weasley just not see Hagrid the whole time she was at school? When did this mysterious Og retire? I mean, I guess it makes sense that Hagrid wasn't just immediately like, hey, 13-year-old, you're the gamekeeper, do all the professional things. Either way, he's been employed by the school in some capacity since then. Since then, being 1942 and present day in the books ending in 1998 means that Hagrid has been working at Hogwarts for 56 years. Which, by the way, fun fact, that means when he meets Harry, he is a mere 62 years old. Meaning that Harry's first best friend in the wizarding world is basically a senior citizen. I have to say, he looks great. That is 56 years of collecting a salary while also not having to pay rent or a mortgage or utilities or for food, and it doesn't seem like he really bought very many other things in that time either. Of course, we don't know exactly what his salary is, but 50 years of collecting any salary with so few expenses is pretty much always going to add up, especially since Dumbledore seems particularly generous. We know, for example, he offers Dobby 10 galleons a week for a job which must be the lowest paying in the entire castle, and Hagrid is no mere employee. Dumbledore is happy to tell anyone who'll listen that he would trust Hagrid with his life.
I would trust Hagrid with my life.
And we certainly do see him trust Hagrid with other people's lives, like baby Harry the night his parents were murdered, or Nicholas Flamel when he has him retrieve the Philosopher's Stone from Gringotts. Hagrid is someone Dumbledore values highly, and I'm sure he's been paying him accordingly. And all that is even before he even becomes a full-fledged professor. So, the question is Hagrid just quietly sitting on a small fortune? Well, let's examine the facts surrounding what Hagrid is financially capable of and accustomed to in the wizarding world. His first trip to Gringotts with Harry ends up being quite telling in a variety of ways. It goes a bit like this. Harry and Hagrid walk up to a desk and ask to visit the long-dormant, extremely valuable Potter Vault, and then also an even more valuable vault containing the Philosopher's Stone. To gain access to these two highly valuable vaults, he needs to only produce a single gold key, which is the one to Harry's vault, and a letter from Albus Dumbledore. It all seems very casual and ordinary, but just moments before this, Hagrid is telling Harry how highly secure Gringotts is and how mad you'd have to be to try and rob the place.
Take no safer place, not one.
But like, just consider what is actually happening here. Hagrid gains access to the Potter Vault simply by producing the key to the vault. What kind of security is this? Like, surely if this place is so difficult to rob, you need more than the key to the vault as proof of identity. Otherwise, robbing someone would be as easy as just stealing their key. Sure, yes, Harry himself is actually standing there as well, but so? I know it's actually him, but nobody in the wizarding world has seen this kid in 11 years, and he's also one of the most famous people in all of the wizarding world. Surely you need some other proof of identity, especially considering the source of the key is Hagrid, who so many other people in the wizarding world just seem to kind of consider a bit of like a half-wit, which yes, I know he isn't actually, but that is just sort of the general impression he seems to be giving off in a lot of the books. But no, Hagrid is allowed not just access to the family vault of the most famous wizarding boy ever, but also access to another more secure vault just by producing a letter from Albus Dumbledore. No other checking for forgery or something? Like, is it that easy to get down there? Is that how Voldemort got down there later that same day? You appear to be a shapeless dark cloud of existence, but you do have this note from Dumbledore. Yeah, come right on down. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione actually try to rob the place, they have to take a Polyjuice potion, transfigure Ron, and also hide an actual Gringotts goblin under an invisibility cloak. They approach the desk as Bellatrix, one of the most notorious and recognizable witches alive, who has an even insanely more valuable vault, and even then they are asked for proof of identity in the form of her wand, which they have, and even then Harry has to cast the Imperius Curse to get them past it. But Hagrid, no. What, you have a letter? Come on down, bro. Take the Philosopher's Stone. It can just turn any metal it touches into gold and produce the elixir of life. It's no big deal. Why is this allowed to happen? Because Hagrid must be such a high roller, his vault must be so full of gold that he just gets this kind of insane special treatment. Then, after they visit the vault, Hagrid tells Harry, "Listen, Harry, would you mind if I slipped off for a pick-me-up in the leaky cauldron? I hate them Gringotts carts." Yeah, spoken like someone who has to ride them a lot and deep down enough that the carts get all roller coastery and stuff. Not to mention, when Harry is getting his own money out of the vault, Hagrid takes some time to explain to him the oh-so-simple galleon to sickle to Cutt conversions. The gold ones are galleons, he explained. 17 silver sickles to a galleon and 29 Cunutts to a sickle. It's easy enough. No, it is not. Like, real quick, just off the top of your head, how many Cunutts are in a galleon? While you think about it, how many people are annoyed that I'm saying Cutt instead of nut? I assure you, I'm right. 493, that's how many Cunutts are in a galleon. Good for you, that was impressive mental math. Like, I mean, I know a lot of people think America should switch over to the metric system, but I disagree. I think we need to go to the wizarding currency system. Why operate in factors of 10 when you can operate in factors of 2 different prime numbers, am I right? I mean, if you can't easily multiply and or divide all of your transactions by 17 or 29 or both in some cases after getting an education at a school where they don't even teach math, well, I mean, can you even call yourself a wizard? Hagrid can, because apparently to him, this math is inconsequentially easy. Which to me makes him sound like a surprising savant at mathematics, or else that he is handling money so much and so often that these figures have simply become trivial to him. Bear in mind as you contemplate that this is also a person who claimed he couldn't spell the word Voldemort, a word that is spelled exactly as it sounds, not 10 pages earlier.
No, I can't spell it.
Moving on though, let's also consider some of the gifts he gives Harry over the years, because some of them seem particularly relevant and or expensive. First of all is of course Hedwig, a seemingly unique snowy owl amongst all the other brown ones at Hogwarts. Personally, I don't know how rare snowy owls are in the wild, but the fact that not a single other student has a white owl makes me feel like it's kind of rare and therefore probably a little bit more expensive as well. Plus, consider that Percy Weasley only ever gets his own owl after he gets appointed head boy. Harry. They get Ron a broomstick for becoming a prefect, and you have to think that head boy is a little bit better than prefect, so owls in general must cost more than broomsticks? To be fair, Ron only got a clean sweep 11, and those are barely even better than the old silver arrows, am I right? Then there's Harry's 5th year Christmas gift from Hagrid, a fanged wallet, somewhere to keep your money safe. Something Hagrid clearly values. And lastly, the mokeskin pouch he gives Harry for his 17th birthday, an item he himself describes as very rare, and again, is a place where you can keep precious things, as only the owner can retrieve the stuff from inside. A cool detail that could have mattered and just totally didn't. Like, I mean, how many things does Harry wish he'd put in there when the Snatchers came and got all their other stuff? But at least he filled it with trash. Not to mention Fluffy, the giant 3-headed dog he says he bought from a trader at the Leaky Cauldron, which 1, sounds illegal, and 2, sounds very expensive. Also, actually, is the access he has to other various beast-related assets, like unicorn hair tails or acromantula venom. Slughorn says you could get 100 galleons a pint on the acromantula venom. To be fair to Hagrid, he doesn't seem particularly interested in harvesting and or cashing in on these assets, but I think it's still worth considering in his total net worth. By the way, does it bother anyone else that Slughorn says he could get 10 galleons per unicorn hair when wands which can cast magic and also have a unicorn hair in them only cost 7 galleons? Like, do all wizards just suck at math? Possibly they do, but one thing I'm sure of is that Hagrid does not. Given his purchasing power, length of employment, lack of expenses, humble existence, and special treatment from goblins, I can only assume that Hagrid's vault at Gringotts is even more full than Bellatrix's. And I know I kind of sound like I've been accusing Hagrid of being rich as if he's doing something wrong, but honestly, if this is true, it just makes me like him even more. That despite vast wealth, he still seems happy with just the humble and simple things in life. And even though he could buy Harry literally anything, sometimes it's still better to just carve him a flute. But Ben, there you go. My question for you and everyone else is, what do you think? Is Hagrid secretly super wealthy? Let me know your thoughts in the towel section down below.
Does Newt Scamander have a secret daughter who's been hiding in plain sight this whole time?
Might be.
Look for it.
Hey, brother. Question. Who are Newt Scamander's children? Not something I thought I'd ever care about. Because I gotta tell you, way back in Philosopher's Stone when Harry first bought Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, I never thought we'd get to know the author as well as we did. And yet, one Newton Artemis Fido Scamander has beaten the odds and gotten his own unfinished pentology? That's the 5 of a trilogy, right? In fact, it is. I paid the anthology budget, but that's not the point. The point is, we actually know a ton about Newt now and his contributions to the downfall of Grindelwald. And by that, I of course mean this physical downfall up the edge of the structure and not his eventual downfall in 1945, because, the series got canned. Sold. But we do know his wife, Tina, his best friend, Jacob, his suitcase, Brown, what house he was in, Hufflepuff, his brother, the Hunk, even what he does in retirement. But what we don't know is where on earth he was during the entire war versus Voldemort. And don't say he was at Hogwarts in prisoner. Like, I know, I saw it too on the map there. It's mighty fun, but it's an Easter egg. That's all. That's where we leave it. But otherwise, for such a powerful and knowledgeable man who helped Dumbledore take down one super evil wizard, you'd think he'd be on call to do it again. Even if he didn't want to, because frankly, I'm not sure he even wanted to help the first time around. I mean, I guess you could argue he was born in 1897, so, by the time Harry even starts school, he'd be in his 90s, which maybe cuts him some slack, but also, he did help recruit a much older man in the war against Grindelwald.
But I'm an alchemist and therefore immortal.
Don't look a day over 300. Plus, Dumbledore himself is like in Hold On to Your Butts, Harry, Ron, and Hermione. 150 or something? Everyone laughed. I know, I'm convinced Rupert Grint made this joke off camera and everyone died laughing. Then they asked him to do it again and the magic was just gone. Which is ironic because it's a joke about wizards, so you think there'd be lots of magic, but that joke didn't have any magic either, sorry. The thing is, though, we know he and Tina had at least one son because we also know Luna goes on to marry one of his grandchildren, Rolf Scamander. But who was the son? We have no idea. Could it be somebody we know? And Could they have had any siblings? Well, I don't know about like Luna's father-in-law, but I think we have 100% zeroed in on at least one of Newt's other children, and you will never believe who she is.
Hey, brother!
So, you thought you could hide your daughter from us, didn't you, Newt? Didn't think we'd piece it all together, did you? Well, too bad for you. We have a hyper-analytical podcast digging through every sentence of Harry Potter, and we have found her.
But what I do have are a very particular set of skills. Skills I've acquired over a very long career.
Sorry, that really sounded kind of threatening. I'm pretty excited about it, honestly.
Hi, buddy.
But in order for you to fully appreciate it, we need to get to know Newt a little bit. So let's review what we already know about the Scamander family. We know that sometime after the events in Secrets of Dumbledore, Newt will finally marry Tina.
After years and years of asking and asking and asking, I finally said yes.
And honestly, I would take an entire rom-com of just those two dating. Like, even if it's not Newt and Tina, just get Eddie Redmayne and Catherine Waterston. Their on-screen chemistry is so good. I mean, they finish each other's...
Dementors.
That's what I was gonna say.
The best 60 seconds of Secrets of Dumbledore is the 60 seconds at the very end where Tina finally shows up and they have like one conversation. I dare you to argue with me about it. But getting back on track, we also know that while it's a popular theory that maybe Newt and Tina like retired in America where she's from, which would account for their non-involvement in the Voldemort Wars, they actually retire in Dorset, according to Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, where they do not live alone, but instead live with their three Kneazles, Hoppy, Millie, and Mauler.
This is Dream Crusher. He protects me from having unrealistic goals.
And as we mentioned earlier, our very own Luna Lovegood goes on to marry Newt's grandson, Rolf Scamander, who she then has two sons with herself, Lorcan and Lycan. Which, if you ask me, those names are dead giveaways that Luna has a malediction and is slowly going to become a wolf. But full video by clicking the card. Please go. That's one of my favorite theories that I'm positive is true. But what is weirdly missing from our picture of Newt's life is his own children. Like, we know he has at least one child, and we assume it's a son because Rolf's last name is still Scamander, but that is all we really have to go off of until now, where we have connected some dots that seem to fit together way nicer than you'd think. And so I'm excited to finally reveal Newt's secret daughter, Harry Potter's batty old neighbor, Mrs. Fig. Yeah, stick with me. This is fun. Whilst introduced as just some crazy cat lady on Privet Drive, it turns out Mrs. Arabella Doreen Fig is a squib and a member of the secret society of the Order of the Phoenix. That was a lot of ofs. And it's not just in the Second Wizarding War either. She is also one of the few former members of the original society who Dumbledore immediately sends Sirius to contact upon Voldemort's return at the end of Goblet of Fire. Sirius, I need you to set off at once. You are to alert Remus Lupin, Arabella Fig, Mundungus Fletcher, the old crowd. So, a two-time Order member who, by all accounts, has been on duty even between the wars, just keeping an extra watchful eye on Harry as he is raised by the Dursleys. Then, when Harry has his hearing at the Ministry, we find out that the Ministry doesn't even know she's a squib, or that anyone from the Wizarding world lives anywhere near Harry, which is likely why Dumbledore stationed her in particular. Oh, I'm a resident of Little Whinging, close to where Harry Potter lives.
We have no record of any witch or wizard living in Little Whinging other than Harry Potter.
Because think about it, like, you never really question the idea that a batty old neighbor would exist in suburban life. But when you really think about the other denizens of number 4 Privet Drive, Mrs. Fig's location there seems not but accident. Because everyone else there are people with like fancy new cars and aggressively maintained lawns and hyper fixation on the homogenous lifestyle. Meanwhile, Mrs. Fig has cats, and like a bunch of them, and I am positive the other residents of Privet Drive do not think very highly of her. I mean, case in point, the Dursleys send Harry to visit her sometimes. and they hate the boy.
Right you are, Harry.
Probably the only silver lining from their point of view is that Mrs. Fig serves as some form of cruel treatment towards Harry. All that to say, her position as a squib and lack of registration is likely the exact reason she has the specific post. Like, I wouldn't even be surprised if Dumbledore paid for her home so she could be there. Not that she doesn't have her own occupation though, because actually, I misspoke earlier. I bet some of you've already left comments about it, because I said she has cats, but that's not entirely true. Mrs. Fig has and breeds half Kneazles. That's like half regular cat, half Kneazles. Kneazles being like super hyper intelligent cat creatures in the wizarding world, and the half variety she breeds are like more domesticated versions of them that witches and wizards can then keep as pets. And it's actually exactly what Crookshanks the cat is, and why he's so able to easily spot Sirius and Peter in their animal forms. And at this point, you might be able to start connecting the same dots we did, because what kind of animal did Newt and Tina live with? Kneazles! And it's not a very far reach to think they gave their daughter Arabella one as well, from which she started her breeding. Mrs. Fig would also fit the approximate age range we're going for here, not that we know her exact age or anything, but assuming Newt and Tina have their children in the 1930s or 40s, then their kids would be in their 50s or 60s by the time Harry is at Hogwarts, and Mrs. Fig seems to fit pretty neatly into that age range. Then there's her name, Mrs. Fig. The Mrs. rather than Miss suggests three possibilities. Either she is currently married, she's divorced and kept the name, or she's widowed. So, where are you, Mr. Fig? Well, I somehow doubt they're still currently married, as we never hear about him at all, and I guess it's possible they're divorced, but my money is that he's as dead as a Hufflepuff at the end of the Triwizard Tournament.
No! Mrs. Fig.
Oh, I thought I couldn't sneak it in, did ya? I'm sorry. I'm not! Consider this. When Dumbledore tells Sirius to go get the old crowd, he calls her Arabella Fig. But Sirius has been in prison for most of the time since the First War, so if her name had changed since then, he wouldn't know who Dumbledore was talking about. Sorry, I remembered an Arabella Scamander, but who? But that means she was married before or during the First Wizarding War, and we know Mrs. Fig is part of the Order of the Phoenix, which likely means that her husband was too, and, you know, not for nothing, but like the mortality rate wasn't super great for those guys. And personally, I would also bet that he was a wizard himself, and that the breeding of the half Kneazles symbolically represents him, with her being the non-magic half and him being the magic half. But I hear you, like, is that alone enough to connect Newt to Mrs. Fig? Like, just the fact that they both have Kneazles? Well, maybe not. But don't worry, there is more, although we've actually already touched on some of it. But I'll say it again, Mrs. Fig is in the Order of the Phoenix. She works for Dumbledore just like Newt did. I mean, how does a squib get on the inside of the most secret wizard organization on Earth? By having connections. Yeah, that's right. Mrs. Fig is a Nepo baby. / hero. Thank you very much. No, it's more likely she just wanted to contribute to the cause, like her father did, and she has a lot more in common with Newt than you might realize. Obviously, she's good with beasts, or at least Kneazles, but also is definitely considered a bit of an outsider, even though she's a part of the wizarding world. Because Newt, despite his many talents, feels like he doesn't fit in with the other students at Hogwarts, which is what he and Lita end up bonding over. And just from like a story writing perspective, narratively, Newt and Tina having a squib just feels right. Their entire love story is about overcoming their own lack of confidence, their own awkwardness, while at the same time being unable to understand why the other one can't see how great they are. They see and bring out the greatness in each other, despite the faults they see in themselves. And in the wizarding world, squibs are definitely, and wrongly, I might add, looked down upon.
You blithering idiot.
But Newt and Tina are the kind of parents who would never let little Arabella ever feel she was at all unworthy just because she didn't have magic. Newt is the one who takes care of all the things nobody takes the time to understand. His entire arc is set up for him to have a squib child. But here's where it gets really, really fun, because it ties in amazingly with another popular fan theory that Crookshanks used to belong to the Potters. We actually have a whole video about it, but here's the short version. In her letter to Sirius, Lily mentions that they have a cat, but we never find out what happens to the cat after Voldemort's attack. But then in Prisoner, when Hermione gets Crookshanks, the shop owner says he's been there for a very long time, and the 12 years in between those 2 points would definitely count as a long time.
I did my waiting! 12 years of it!
Plus, as we mentioned, Crookshanks is a half-Kneasel, just like what Mrs. Fig, the Order of the Phoenix friend of the Potters, breeds. Crookshanks also immediately hates Peter but loves Sirius, which would make sense if he knew them ahead of time and knew who the real friend and the real betrayer was. And if both of these stories are true, it creates a really fun through line from Newt to Harry, because one of Newt's own Kneasels would have been the great-great-great-grandparent or whatever of the cat Harry's parents would eventually own. Also, small little bonus theory if you want to know where the name Crookshanks came from. It's described as a ginger cat with bowed legs, right? Well, when you first meet Mundungus Fletcher, he is described as having a ginger beard and bowed legs, but he would have been a member of the Order of the Phoenix as well. So what I think happened is Mrs. Fig had Crookshanks, she gives him to the Potters, and they're like, oh my god, he looks like Mundungus the Crook. So they name him Crookshanks. Boom. Wait, Fig? Newtons.
Hey, brother! Quick warning, this video will contain spoilers for Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald. Ugh! Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald. Personally, we loved it, but it did leave us with a lot of questions or things that maybe didn't seem to totally add up. And the big one I keep seeing so many people talk about, even though it is a fairly small plot point in the movie, is the appearance of none other than Professor McGonagall. And you might be thinking, well, sure, we see her in a couple of scenes and it was like fun to see her, but what's the big deal? And I agree, when I watched it the first time, I thought, oh, that's just a fun little bit of fan service, a polite nod to the present day wizarding world we all know and love. And yet, the problem is, when you go back and think about it, you realize that this movie takes place in 1927 and that Professor McGonagall hasn't even been born yet. Okay, so maybe you are a savvy Potter researcher and you've been on Pottermore and you know that it lists McGonagall's birth date, but not her birth year. So you might be thinking, Jay, how do you know when she was born? To which I say, gosh, I sure love it when you ask exactly the question I want you to ask. It's almost like I wrote the words for you to ask myself, when actually Ben did. Okay, so let's read between some lines here, because this date is totally totally able to be you know what I mean. Despite not much information about her being available in the main series books, we actually know a ton about Minerva McGonagall's life. And not from the movies, like this little Easter egg right here, where it looks like she played Quidditch with James Potter. Which, no, she didn't. This is actually factually inaccurate on 2 counts. 1, because James played Chaser and not Seeker, and 2, because McGonagall is way older than this. And yes, that's way with an H. In fact, she may be even way older than this, but more on that later. In the actual books that actually count, though, it's a blink and you miss it detail from Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, but it happens when Dolores Umbridge is interviewing McGonagall about whether or not she should remain teaching. She asks, how long have you been teaching at Hogwarts? And she responds, 39 years this December. And that is something we can work with. Order of the Phoenix takes place in 1996, and all we have to do is subtract 39, and that lands us in 1957 for when she started working at Hogwarts. But even then, it's like, well, we don't know when she started working at Hogwarts relative to when she graduated, so does that really give us a date? But that is where you were wrong. We actually do have that information because there is an ebook on Pottermore called Heroism, Hardships, and Dangerous Hobbies. And in this book, there is actually an entire chapter dedicated to McGonagall's early life, like for example, we learned that upon graduating Hogwarts, she fell in love with a local Muggle man, Dougal McGregor, who has the best name ever. Dougal actually even got as far as proposing to her, and she said yes. Aww. But then she broke it off literally one day later because she didn't want to hide her magic from him. Aw, man. So instead of marrying Dougal McGregor, she takes a job at the Ministry of Magic in the Magical Law Enforcement Office, where she would work for 2 years. And as you might expect, she was quite gifted at her job, and after just 2 years, she was offered a nice promotion, at which point she said no, because anytime someone offers McGonagall something nice, she's like, see ya. No, instead, that is when she decided to send an owl to Hogwarts to see if they could offer her a teaching position. She got the owl back later that day saying yes, she could be hired, and as a position under Professor Dumbledore, the head of the Transfiguration Department. Which, first of all, is odd because I don't remember any professor in any Harry Potter book having an assistant at all, or even being the head of the department. Whatever, the point is she worked at the ministry for 2 years after she graduated Hogwarts, so that's 17 years of age minus 1955. That brings us to 1938, the year she was born. Over 10 years after the events of Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald. And yet, in the movie, we see her as a teacher at Hogwarts twice. First in Dumbledore's classroom, and then again in the flashback to Lita and Newt, taking place in like 1914 or 15. Like, McGonagall, I know you're really magical and stuff, but being 20 years old before you're born is like really impressive. And I know what you're thinking. Jay, don't you think it was probably just one of her relatives? And again, thank you so much for asking the exact question I wanted you to, because she is definitely not one of her relatives. Minerva McGonagall was born a half-blood to the Reverend Robert McGonagall, or as I like to call him, Bob Gonagall, and witch mother, Isabel Ross, and the two married very young. Isabel was just 18. Not only that, Bob, as you might have been able to figure out, was a Muggle with no knowledge that his wife, Isabel, was actually a very talented witch. Got a real Seamus Finnegan situation going on here, don't we?
Your dad's a Muggle, Mom's a witch. Bit of a nasty shock for him when he found out.
I should note that nowhere does it actually call him Bob, but I'm gonna keep doing it because I think it's funny. Anyway, when Isabel and Bob fell in love, she went to the extent of locking her wand away beneath her bed to hide her magic from him. And she would keep this secret until well after the birth of their first child, Minerva, and she eventually decided she had to reveal the secret because Minerva was starting to show signs of magic, and she didn't want him to walk in and see her doing something out of the ordinary. If you're keeping track though, that means her mother, Isabel, didn't do any magic again until 1938 when her daughter was born. The point I'm trying to make is that Isabel Ross wouldn't have had the last name McGonagall until after she was married, which she did right out of Hogwarts, and then she didn't practice any magic again until 1938, well after the events of this movie. So the McGonagall we see in the movie cannot possibly be Minerva's mother. But what about her grandmother, I hear you saying? And you're not wrong, that's a track we went down as well, and in fact, Minerva McGonagall, the one we know, was named after her grandmother on her mother's side, and she was known to be a talented witch, so for a second I thought that might be it, except, of course, she wouldn't have the last name McGonagall, she'd have the last name Ross. In order for the McGonagall we saw in Crimes of Grindelwald to have the last name McGonagall, she has to have come from the father's side of the family, so maybe it was one of Bob's sisters or something, it was an aunt, but again, no. Because remember, Bob is Muggle born, and the first time he ever learns about magic is when his wife tells him she's a witch. And certainly if he had magical sisters, he would have at least known about the existence of the wizarding world ahead of time, right? Like Aunt Petunia.
Mother and father were so proud. We have a witch in the family. Isn't it wonderful?
So here's where things get interesting though, because despite everything we've just said, I'm convinced that the woman we see in the movie is in fact Minerva McGonagall, the one we know who eventually goes on to teach Harry Potter. But how is that possible if we've just established that she wasn't born yet? How does one exist before one was born? Do you see where we are going? That's right, time turner. Yeah, okay, so I don't love this explanation any more than you guys do, but the only other possible explanations are that one, it just happened to be a different woman with the same last name, with the same accent and mannerisms, and why on earth would you even show it to us if it's not related to the one? Or two, it was completely a mistake that somebody overlooked and now it exists in canon and we all just have to deal with it. Which, no, I refuse. I do not accept that. I mean, J.K. Rowling wrote the screenplay herself, and I just don't believe that she accidentally made this huge retcon anachronistic mistake. So we're left with nothing else except time turners. But the good news is it's actually kind of cool. And before we dive into it, first let's just reestablish what the rules of time travel are in Harry Potter. It can seem pretty complicated, but it's also pretty simple. Whenever someone travels back in time, the new corrective actions they take have always already happened. Like when Harry and Hermione go back in the Prisoner of Azkaban and throw the rock through the window to alert themselves to leave the house. This happens both times, they just don't understand that it was them the first time. When Hermione howls to distract Professor Lupin, that happens both times. Things are always the way they are even before you in the present went back in time in the future, because you already did. Right? So the question is, when did she travel back in time from? And I think we have the answer. 1957, the same year she started working at Hogwarts under Professor Dumbledore. Remember our old buddy from earlier, Dougal McGregor, who got dumped by McGonagall one day after they were engaged? Well, while Minerva was off working at the Ministry, Dougal was off falling in love with some other farmer's daughter. And just after Minerva accepted the job at Hogwarts, she found out in a letter from her mother that Dougal had in fact married the other girl. Which leads to this scene, and I'm just gonna read it to you. Albus Dumbledore discovered Minerva in tears in her classroom late that evening, and she confessed the whole story to him. Albus Dumbledore offered both comfort and wisdom, and told Minerva some of his own family history previously unknown to her. The confidences exchanged that night between two intensely private and reserved characters were to form the basis of a lasting mutual esteem and friendship. Minerva McGonagall was one of only a handful of people who knew or suspected how dreadful a moment it was for Albus Dumbledore when, in 1945, he made the decision to confront and defeat the Dark Wizard, Gellert Grindelwald. So, heartbreak between Muggle and wizard kind. Does that sound familiar to you? Because if you've seen the movie, you'll know that that is exactly the plot between Jacob and Queenie. And we see that it can be a hugely motivating factor, and it would be even doubly so for McGonagall, who 1, just got heartbroken, and 2, had to watch her parents go through this exact same thing. Which is why I think the conversation I just read is when Dumbledore asked McGonagall to go back in time to help him fight Grindelwald from 1957 to 1915-ish, about 42 years. To help him fight a dark wizard who would rule over the Muggles and never allow this to happen. To help him fight for a world where it is okay for wizards and Muggles to get married. Ironically, this is the exact opposite action Queenie takes to accomplish the exact same goal. Go figure. In any case, I'm sure you still have a few questions, but don't worry, there are a few bases still left to cover. Like, first of all, that 40 plus years is way longer than we've ever seen a time turner travel before, but actually, it's not. Over on Pottermore, there's actually an article about time turners where you can learn about Eloise Mintumble, who traveled almost 500 years into the past, got trapped for 5 days, and then eventually died upon return. Then there's the Cursed Child, where they eventually invent a time turner that can travel to any point and Back to the Future, no problem, but you know, whatever. Point is, it is conceivably possible. The other big problem is that she's traveling to behind her birth, and so would then have to hide from herself for quite some time as she aged back into the present. But again, this is pretty easily explained away. For one, if she does have a time turner that can just travel to any point in the past and then back to the present whenever you're ready, well, there you go, she'd just do it when she was done. Or, lest we forget that McGonagall is also an animagus, and she can transform into a cat, and so could easily evade detection for years at a time, similar to Peter Pettigrew in Prisoner of Azkaban. And finally, there's the case of Minerva McGonagall's eventual husband, Elphinstone Urquhart. Remember those 2 years back at the Ministry? Well, during that time, Urquhart was her much older boss, who she was very fond of. And even though she left the Ministry, the two kept in touch, and actually over time he proposed to her several times, but she always turned him down. But really what I find odd about the description of Elphinstone Urquhart, whose name is not nearly as good as Dougal McGregor, is that they specifically describe him as much older. My question though is, why specify specifically that this guy who is fond of her is much older. It just seems like an irrelevant detail unless it turns out that McGonagall had traveled into the past and gained up to 10 or even 20, possibly 40 years reliving that time, because then fast forward to the present when she does eventually marry Urquhart. Well, sure, on paper he'd be older than her, but she actually would probably be much closer to his actual age. Also, I just love the idea that back in 1915, at one point Minerva McGonagall walks into young Dumbledore's office and is like, "Albus, my name is Minerva McGonagall, and I was sent from the future by you to help you defeat Dark Wizard Gellert Grindelwald." Because you know Dumbledore would be like, "Oh, cool." Which would be awesome, because then future him would always be waiting for the day when in real time he would meet the crazy time traveler lady who he would then send back to help himself. Seriously blown though. God, thinking about time travel hurts my head. Ben, my question for you and everyone else is, what do you think? Did Dumby send Mindy into the pasty to help save his face? Let me know your thoughts in the towel section down below. But guys, thanks as always for watching. Please remember to leave a like on the video if you haven't already, and subscribe so you don't miss any future Harry Potter action from us. If you'd like to see Ben and I's full spoiler review of Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald, you can check out this video right here. Or if you'd like to take the Fantastic Beasts quiz and see if you can best me and Ben, you can check out this video right here. But Ben, that's all I've got for you. I will see you in another life, brother.